Hey, my name's Kelsey from PoofyCheeks.com, and today I'm going to share a step-by-step tutorial on how to make a glitter tumbler. The very first step in making an epoxy tumbler of any kind is to prep your cup. And we're going to do that by sanding down our cup. You can either use a new cup or an older cup and give it new life. I use a 220 grit sandpaper and I just lightly rub that back and forth on the cup. I want to rough it up enough so that when I do the spray paint step, it has something to adhere to. And don't forget to get the bottom of your cup. At this point, you're done sanding your cup, but you need to know what design you're going to add, what color glitters, because that's going to depend on the color of spray paint you use and if you're going to do the entire cup one color or if you're going to do an ombre effect with two colors. Making glitter tumblers or any epoxy tumbler is a process that takes a few days, so you're going to see that I'm piecing clips together from many different cups for this tutorial. With that being said, the cup that I'm showing right now is an ombre cup. It is red and yellow. So after I tape off the lip of the cup, then I'm gonna put my cup on just a wand I made using PVC pipe and a cheap dollar store pool noodle. And that helps so that I can really turn the cup easy and I don't get spray paint all over my arm. On top of that, I also wear a glove normally when spray painting so I don't get the spray paint on my hands. For this ombre cup, I'm going to start at the bottom of the cup and work my way to the middle using really short bursts of spray paint. That makes it easier to control. Again, don't forget to get the bottom of your cup, and once you've gotten the paint where you'd like it, you can grab your other color and work from the top of the cup to the middle towards the yellow. The reason for spray painting the cup is so that the metal color or the color of the tumbler does not show through once we apply the glitter. There's nothing worse than doing a white glitter cup and seeing that metal through. So when I first started, I did not do this step and it was a total game changer. Once you have good coverage on your cup and the spray paint is completely dry, it is now time to apply the glitter. But first, let's talk about mixing the epoxy because we're going to use the epoxy method to adhere the glitter to our cup. There are two parts to the epoxy I use. I like to use the Alumilite Clear Cast. I've used a couple other brands and this one just works the best for me. So, in order to adhere the glitter, you're going to want to have 5 milliliters of mixed epoxy, which is 2.5 milliliters of part A and 2.5 milliliters of part B. First, you'll pour each part into their own cup, and you'll stir them each with a popsicle stick. Make sure you're wearing gloves for this step and any time that you're working with the epoxy. It is really sticky, and when it gets stuck on your hands, it's hard to get off. Plus, it can cause a chemical reaction because working with epoxy is working with chemicals. Down in the description, I'll be linking to a blog post I wrote about safety when working with epoxy, and it's extremely important to follow all the precautions. Alumilite Clear Cast is a 1-to-1 ratio epoxy, meaning you mix equal parts of A and B, but if you're using a different brand, check the directions. Some of them are a 2-to-1 ratio. Part A of the Alumilite is a thicker epoxy and part B is a thinner. So I really make sure that I mix part A very well. You're going to scrape the sides, scrape the bottom, and I go really slowly with my popsicle stick for about 1 minute. Then with part B, I do the exact same thing. Once I've done both A and B, I pour the thinner one, B, into the cup of A. It's harder to get A since it's thicker to come out of the cup as easily, and I want to make sure I'm keeping that 1-to-1 ratio. So I found that it's easier to pour the part B into part A. So that's just a tip. Once I get the two epoxies into the same cup, I grab a brand new popsicle stick and I mix it again for another minute, just getting the two all mixed in and it kind of has like a hazy look to it at first, and then it starts to clear up, and that's when you know it's ready. I let the cup of epoxy sit for 30 seconds to a minute just to get all of those bubbles to start rising to the top, because you don't want the bubbles. And then I start applying the epoxy for the glitter. As you can see in this clip of the video, I work out on my back porch because it's well ventilated. It's a screened-in porch, and I have paper down on my floor. I have paper under my cup to catch any epoxy because I don't want to ruin anything. I start out with that 5 milliliters. It doesn't look like a lot, but it is perfect amount for a 30-ounce tumbler, and I just apply it in small strips. On this part, I'm actually using my tumbler and letting it spin while I'm applying the epoxy and the glitter. But if my tumblers are all taken up by other cups, then I just do this using my pool noodle and PVC pipe out in the backyard. So once I get that rubbed all over, you just want a very, very thin layer of epoxy for your glitter. If you use too much epoxy during this step, it's gonna pool the glitter and it's gonna give it a wet look, which you don't want. This specific cup is going to be an all white glitter cup, and then I'm gonna put vinyl decals over it. So I start by putting something underneath the cup to collect the glitter. I was using plain printer paper to catch the excess glitter until I purchased this little glitter collector thing from Michael's last week. It has a pour spout where I can pour the glitter back into the container. So I'm just gonna let the cup turn on the cup turner and sprinkle the glitter back and forth all up and down the cup. If I see any areas that don't look like they have good coverage, I'll go back and catch those. And this is why it's really important to spray paint the cup, because this white glitter is really finicky, and even if I have like dripping paint or I don't have a nice coverage of paint, you're gonna be able to see it with white glitter. Once I finish applying the glitter to the tumbler and everything looks good, I'm gonna let it sit on the tumbler for probably 3 to 4 hours and dry. Or if you're not using a tumbler, then you're just gonna leave it on the pool noodle for a couple hours to dry. I tend to let these dry overnight just to ensure everything is cured before applying the first coat of epoxy over the glitter. Here are a few time-lapse videos of me applying glitter to ombre cups and the ocean type cups that I make. I tend to do these outside with paper because I find it's just quicker and easier to pour the glitter back in when I'm using multiple colors. This time we're going to mix our epoxy again, but we're going to go ahead and mix a total of 20 milliliters. So with my epoxy, that's 1-to-1 ratio. I'm going to mix 10 milliliters of part A and 10 milliliters of part B, the same exact way as we did before, just stirring really slowly, trying to get rid of as many bubbles as possible, scraping the sides and the bottom. And just in case I did not stress this enough last time, I get 1 cup for part A with its own popsicle stick, then I do another cup for part B with a separate popsicle stick, and once I pour part B into part A, I use a third popsicle stick to make sure the ratios are staying the way they're supposed to. If you get the ratios mixed up at all, you will end up with a cup that is still tacky, and that is no good. I'm going to give you a little close-up of the epoxy. This is once I've mixed parts A and B together. Can you see some of those bubbles popping? That is what you want. I even go ahead and tap the cup on the table a couple times to try to get those bubbles to rise up to the top even faster. I'm going to slide something underneath my cup to catch any dripping epoxy. I use paper, or sometimes I use parchment paper, just whatever I have on hand, and then I try to reuse it multiple times so I'm not wasting. Then, the same as before, we're just going to pour strips of epoxy down the cup and use our gloved fingers to rub it around. You can go in any direction because epoxy is self-leveling. So I tend to kind of do a circular motion, and then I'll go back and do a back and forth motion. Once I think I have the cup fully covered, all the glitter seems to be covered, I kind of look at it from an angle to see if there's any other dry spots showing up, and I'll go back and I'll pour a little bit more epoxy or rub it around as needed. Now we're gonna let the cup turn for about 8 to 10 hours or overnight. It all depends on your temperature. Epoxy likes warm temperatures, so living in Florida, I think my cups tend to dry faster than somebody that lives in a more northern state. I always tend to have to do 2 coats of epoxy over the glitter. So once my cup is completely dry, then I go ahead and I use sandpaper, and I try to get any bumps or imperfections out of the cup. I use a 220 grit sandpaper really lightly on the cup to get any air bubbles that might have developed. I try to get those out, or any chunks of glitter. If I'm using really chunky glitter, sometimes I even have to use an X-Acto knife and kind of trim those. And then I'll go back with 600 grit wet dry sandpaper, and I'll go over it again. Then apply the second coat of epoxy over the glitter. For the second coat, I also use 20 milliliters, and I give it a nice thick coat. This coat should be really easy to apply because you've already got a nice smooth coat of epoxy on it. You're just covering up, like I said, any imperfections and any glitter that still might not have gotten fully covered before. Let it spin for 8 to 10 hours, and then let it continue to dry for up to 24 hours. And then you've got a finished glitter tumbler. At this point, you can either leave it how it is, or you can apply vinyl and a third coat to seal in the vinyl. That I'm going to save for another day and another tutorial, but this explains the process of making a glitter tumbler to you. I hope that you liked this video. I know it got a little long, but there's a lot to cover when it comes to making a glitter tumbler. Go ahead, give us a thumbs up and subscribe so that you can continue to watch the new glitter tumbler tutorials that we share here on our channel.